And we are live, so I guess I will welcome everybody. Hello, good evening, good morning, good day. My name is Bente Liljaby. I'm from Norway. I will be your host today in this side event of the Geo Week to 2021. This side event is by the Data Working Group, and you will learn a lot about the work that has been done in this group through the stories that our excellent presenters will tell you today. So before we start, we'd just like to, with the program, we'd just like to do some housekeeping. We are set to last about 1.5 hours. We have a short break around well, I don't remember exactly. You will see the program shortly. We have a 5-minute break. You can ask during the presentations. You will be able to ask questions and comment. We welcome comments also in the chat. The program is very busy, so there won't be so much time to have a dialogue, questions and answer after each of the presentations. Yeah, thank you, Paula. But if ask the questions, because we will be able to answer it in the chat. And if time allows, we will open the floor and discuss this on the stage if time allows towards the end. So that's basically the program. The slides will be made available for you afterwards. There will be recordings. So sit back and relax and enjoy all the good things. We are going to be reminded about the data sharing and data management principles. And here you see the speakers. I will introduce them as we move along. We have a very busy program, as I said. And yeah, can you do the next slide, Paula? Yes, so this is what we are going to talk about today. The upper center is the geo data sharing principles, and the next, the data management principles. And that's not me. We have a slide with the data management principles as well. And I want you to notice that we call it the geo data sharing and the geo data management principles, but they are the same as the former GEOS data sharing and data management principles. And Bob Shen will talk about all of this. Paula, are you having trouble sharing your screen?
Can you see my screen?
Nope.
Oh, it's turning down. Okay, you should be able to see the screen now. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can see Bob. But before, just can you go back to the very first? Because I want to give credit to the 4 subgroups of the data working group. We have divided the work in the data working group in 4 subgroups. The very first one, back. And there you go. So for your information, we have data sharing and data management principles subgroup, in situ data subgroup, law and policy subgroup, and data ethics subgroup. All of these topics will be covered from different angles throughout the story that we are telling in this side event. So now we can start with you, Bob, and we will learn about the legacy of our geo data sharing and data management principles. Bob is a senior in geo. He is a director and senior research scientist at the Earth Institute of Columbia University, New York, United States. So, Bob, the floor is yours. We are looking forward to hear the legacy of geo data sharing and data management principles.
Thanks, Bente. And I'm actually now part of something called the Columbia Climate School. But I'm actually also on the delegation currently of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. So that's one of the GEO participating organizations, of course. But I think the reason I was asked to talk about this is that I first started working on data sharing in 2006, about a year after GEO was founded. And at that point, I was Secretary General of CODATA. And we were brought in to help with the initial establishment of mainly of implementation guidelines. Because one of the interesting things about GEO was that there was recognition in the founding document that open data sharing was important. And so it was actually incorporated into the 10-year implementation plan that was the basis for the organization. Next. So back then, there was an original set of data sharing principles, which I think was in line with the times. It talked about full and open exchange of data. And of course, recognizing GEO's status as an intergovernmental voluntary organization, there were some limits to that. But in general, I think this was in line with the times and, translating principles into practical procedures and coordination was kind of the task for the initial 10-year period. So next slide. Just to highlight a few, not all of the activities. As I mentioned, there were the guidelines. There was a recognition that GEO should try to go further and have at least a core set of resources that were more fully open. And so we created the concept of the GS Data Core. There was a lot of interest in issues, for example, related to legal interoperability, kind of investigating and articulating the role of the public domain, which is not globally accepted. So the idea of using open access data licenses, I think, has grown over time because of their prevalence and applicability. And then at various points in time, the realization came that beyond data sharing, there were important principles for data management that were emerging from the Earth observation community that needed to be articulated more clearly. And that led to the set of 10 principles and also the nice graphics that came with it. And those were approved in 2014. There was also efforts to assess the value of open data, and CODATA and others contributed as part of the various data working groups and task forces to those efforts. Next. But I think a little over 10 years ago, there was a realization that the world was changing and that not only was data sharing really essential to GEO, but that GEO needed to kind of stay ahead of the curve. And that's when the data sharing group at the time started formulating the new principles, which were eventually adopted in 2015 in Mexico City. Next. And this is the text that Bente also showed at the beginning, which were embedded in the strategic plan for 2016 to 2025. I assume they'll persist beyond, but these embodied this broader idea that data should really be open by default. I mean, there are good reasons to have restrictions and so forth, but by default, the idea is certainly the publicly funded data should be open and shared. And there were some wording changes and things in the second and third principles to try to increase the openness. Next. And I put this in, this is off the website, because, by agreeing to become a member or a participating organization in GEO, the organization automatically accepts the principles. And people have still continued to join GEO. We heard this morning of several more participating organizations. So, the current data sharing principles are not a barrier or anything like that. They're, I hope, a enticement to increasing GEO's membership and legacy. Next. And so just to kind of summarize quickly, and this is by no means a complete list, what is the legacy? I think GEO has helped set the standard for open data sharing and management. First of all, it's of course has a great portal and catalogs that are accessible and hundreds of millions of items. But behind that is a commitment by countries, the European Commission, and all sorts of other organizations to make their data open, to adopt open data sharing and management policies. You see that in, obviously, new big resources like Sentinel and programs like Inspire. Whoops, lost my thing. Also, groups like the World Data System adopting the principles. The World WMO just recently adopted the kind of two-tier core idea, and some of the data management principles, I think, are kind of precursors to what you're starting to see in FAIR and other guidance. And of course, Carl's going to talk about that. So that's just a quick overview of what I think are some of the accomplishments. And I'm looking forward to the kind of discussion here to kind of see where people get feedback on where we should be going and what this legacy means. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bob. All that efforts and all those years in less than 10 minutes. That's not bad. Just before we go on to give the floor to Carl, I just wanted to give you some hints to the story we are telling. Now, as you understood, Bob introduced us to the legacy of the geodata sharing principles. We will now talk about, or Carl will do a little bit of crosswalk, because since we were initiated, there's a lot of other principles in the community, and Carl will make a crosswalk to sort of position our principles with respect to the rest of the world, and then we are moving to the regional geos, and we are looking more at how the geo principles have been implemented both in different regions, and we have the European one as an example, in international organizations, and we have the Orgos Convention with Marina as an example. Then we are also looking at how the GEO principles has been implemented in the GEO work program, and that's Paula who will take us through the survey. And finally, we will look more towards the future. In between, we will see how the link between what we call Earth observations and data and the knowledge and open knowledge rather than open data, and also the Knowledgehub. So this is the story that you will hear throughout the next the few minutes. So now, Carl, with that, I will give the floor to you, Carl Benedict. He will take us on the crosswalk between GEO principles. I call the GEO principles, this is the GEO data sharing and data management principles I'm talking about. And he will take us through a crosswalk, and Carl is representing two units and two organizations. One is the University of New Mexico, and the other is ESIP, participating organization. Now, Carl, the floor is yours. You're mute. And he disappeared.
Carl, we cannot hear you.
I think he also disappeared from the room. Yeah, he left the stage. He's probably have some issues. Yeah, there he comes back.
Carl is coming back now.
Still mute. Or try to say something, Carl. You are still mute, even though it looks like your microphone is on. So maybe you need to, I don't know, a reboot or find another outlet. Oh, okay. So Jose Miguel is giving us an advice. If you're using the browser, you may need to allow the browser to use your sound. So allowing, yeah, he's nodding. we are getting used to all this technology, but every now and then there will be some disagreements between the user of the technology and the technology. Meanwhile, I will like to ask you a question while we are waiting for Carl to fix his microphone. I would like to ask you, if you are in the audience, we don't know so much about you. Are you familiar with the geodata sharing and data management principles? I will just shortly publish a poll so you can answer us.
Carl says in the chat that he's trying to change his mic.
Yeah. So I think, in the interest of time here, that maybe we should jump to Jose Miguel, even though we would have liked to go do the crosswalk before. I think that might be a good way of spending our time, so that we give Carl some time to fix his technology problem. How do you say about that? Are you agreeing with me, Paula and Florian?
Yes, Bente, I'm sharing the screen at Jose Miguel bio.
Yes. Okay, Jose Miguel, are you ready?
Yes. Can you hear me properly? Yes.
Okay. I can hear you, Monsieur. But before I give you actually the floor, I would like to introduce you, Jose Miguel. Rubio Iglesias, you work as a data manager at the European Environmental Agency, and you are going to take us through some exciting implementations of the GEO principles in Europe. So the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Bente. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. Yeah, what I would like to do is a bit complicated, because we have a number of examples of initiatives and programs and projects in Europe which are resonating and are reflecting as well on the messages which are within the geodata sharing management principles. If you can go next slide, Paula. Yeah, as I was saying, it's a bit complicated to do a summary and in 8 minutes. Europe has actually been a front runner in implementing open data sharing and open data management practices. Has been there are currently a number of initiatives, projects which are building on open data and open data sharing practices. We will hear later on for me what it is actually a part of the inception of all these practices, which is actually the Orgos Convention of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. We will hear more later on, but the European Union adopted the Orgos Convention in 2003 with the idea of ensuring that environmental information was systematically available and distributed to the public. This has somehow been linked to other initiatives, like, for example, Inspire in the context of geospatial information, data sharing and data interoperability. We also have more recently the open data policy of the the European Union Earth Observation program, Copernicus, and we also have not necessarily linked to environmental information, but more to the general public sector information, the Open Data Directive, which actually takes somehow the baton, so to speak, from the G8 data charter, which was signed by the G8 countries in 2013. What is also interesting, and I will mention this later as well, is the concept of high-value data sets, which is also promoting the accessibility of free of charge of key essential data sets, in particular Earth observation and geospatial information. So if we go next slide. Yeah, I wanted first to start with the Open Data Directive, which was adopted in June 2019, because it encourages the reuse of public sector information, stimulates the uptake of open APIs, application programming interfaces, also is limiting the exceptions to charge more than marginal costs on public sector data and information. And also something which I think is very relevant as well is that the research data coming from public funding is also in the scope of this Open Data Directive. And one essential element which I consider very important here is the definition of the high-value data sets. The high-value data sets are associated with data sets which have important benefits for society and economy, and they are subject to a separate set of rules, ensuring their availability free of charge in machine-readable formats, via APIs or via bulk download. And the Open Data Directive defines a number of type of high-value data sets, among which we have the geospatial, Earth observation, environment, meteorological data sets as well. We are still pending the adoption of an implementing regulation in 2021 of a further definition of these data sets, but this is indeed a very important step towards making key public sector data sets available free of charge, which is basically pretty much in the spirit as well of the geo data sharing principles. Next slide. Something that I wanted to mention, because I think it's very relevant also for this audience, is the European Strategy for Data, which was unveiled last year, just before the pandemic started. This European strategy for Data builds on a series of pillars. One is the high-value data sets that I mentioned before, but also it conveys a series of instruments which are still a bit in the making, but I think are very relevant with many of the activities we do here in the data working group and in GEO in general. One is the Data Governance Act, which is covering data from public bodies, private companies, citizens, and which aims to safely enable the sharing of sensitive data held by public bodies and regulate data sharing by private actors. We also have another called Data Act, and the Data Act will foster business to government data sharing, which we are also pretty much discussing in many sessions here, and also supporting business-to-business data sharing. So this European strategy for data will really establish, so to speak, a single market for data in Europe. And another key element here is the establishment of the common data spaces. Some of you may have heard about it. It's something being discussed and in the making, but the idea is that we will ensure through these data spaces the access to more data available, which are of use for economy and society, by keeping as well individuals and companies who generate this data in control. So next slide. I could not do this presentation without referring to the Inspire Directive, which is also pretty much related to data sharing, in particular in the field of geospatial data and information. This directive is already 14 years old. Now we are reaching the full implementation and aims at creating and European spatial data infrastructure in order to facilitate the sharing of public sector data for environmental policies. Here we are speaking, of course, as well, including in situ data. This directive has really made possible the sharing of data across Europe, harmonizing the way we were publishing metadata, using standards to create services, and ensuring data interoperability. Following a series of principles, like collecting data only once, keep it where it can be maintained most effectively, making sure that data can be seamlessly combined, that the data is readily and transparently available, can be easy to find, and we can know, thanks to the standard metadata, under which conditions this data is shared. The Inspire Directive currently is undergoing an evaluation and potentially a revision in the future, which with the main objective of aligning as well this with a potential revision of the Directive of Access to Environmental Information that I mentioned before. Next slide. I could also mention many other initiatives, but of course, being in Geo, I could not stop mentioning the open data policy of Copernicus. And when it comes to that covers particularly the data, the satellite data from the Sentinels, as well as the data published through the services. When it comes to in situ data, in particular, the Copernicus Open Data Policy covers only the data from the program, but third parties data are not covered. In that sense, the Copernicus in situ component, which is managed or coordinated by the institution I work for, the European Environment Agency, is trying there to work towards trying to identify where are gaps in data, trying to support the services in accessing reference data, and also trying to establish partnerships with data providers, like, for example, Eurogeographics, to make sure that this data is made readily available. Next slide. But still, there is a lot of. I lost the slide, but I can go on. Still, there is a lot of work to do in the context of the sharing of in situ data, besides all the activities related to which are related to open data policies, and that's why we, together with the European Commission, are working currently in a project which is about promoting the implementation of geodata sharing and management principles, in particular focusing on data which are essential for environmental policies, in particular in the context of climate adaptation. We'll be working together with the Geo community, in particular in the context of EuroGeo, into making available more statistics and data in support of adaptation strategy, and also mainstreaming climate resilience considerations in key community systems. And next and final slide. Just a final reflections in this context. I think we still need to really work, despite all the work that we have been doing in open up data sets and open up public sector data sets. There is still a lot of work to do in the context of in situ. There are still many challenges, both technical but also especially legal challenges. And the idea with this presentation is also to send a message of the potential of Geo as a community to stepping up our work and making in situ data available, and definitively through this activity that I just mentioned, to make this possible within the European context. So that's it for me. Thanks a lot, and yeah, happy to respond to any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Jose Miguel, taking that on the fly ahead of time. Again, ask questions in the chat, and we will see if we can also include some questions and discussions towards the end. We have changed a little bit the program now. So, Carl, can we cross our fingers and maybe hear about crosswalking?
Yes, hopefully that is the case.
Wonderful, wonderful. So you are about to be invited to a crosswalk with Carl Benedict from the University of New Mexico, and also from ESIP, a participating organization. The floor
Thank
is
you,
yours,
Bente,
Professor.
and apologies for the technical glitch there at the beginning, but hopefully things will sail smoothly from this point forward. Next slide, please. So as Bob already outlined very effectively for us, GEO has established itself as a leader in defining the data management, data sharing principles for the GEO community. But in the years following the development of those principles, of course, other principles and also data lifecycle frameworks have been developed and emerged and gained a lot of visibility. And what the activity that we've been working on in the Data Principles Working Group has been focusing on is looking at the GEO data sharing and data management principles as they compare to other principles and approaches essentially for defining the data lifecycle, with two primary goals in mind: to identify areas of overlap between the GEO principles and these other principles and frameworks, but also to help us better define how we can effectively communicate the GEO principles and how they relate to and connect to these other principles that may be more familiar to some folks than the GEO principles. Next slide, please. What we've done, and I would highlight here that this is a work in progress as we are continuing to develop these crosswalks and are continuing to discuss and look at areas where we might want to refine or expand them. But in the process that we've gone through so far, we have focused on 6 different data life cycles and 3 sets of principles that are our initial focus. The reason we've been focusing on data life cycles is that it's those life cycles that that a lot of organizations and individual users might have familiarity with when it comes to how they envision especially their data management processes. And by being able to look at the connections between the GEO principles and those life cycles, we're in a better position to cross that conceptual bridge for folks that are familiar with these life cycles. Similarly, as new principles have emerged, whether they're the FAIR, CARE, or TRUST principles, which are the first 3 that we have focused on, we are able to link those principles back to the GEO principles to again provide and be able to communicate where the connections are and where there are complementarities between those principles and the GEO principles. And one of the other key things that we've been working on here is to develop the capacity to expand this list. The check marks on this slide indicate the principles and frameworks that we have already done an initial crosswalk for. And the others are those that we're continuing to work on. Next slide, please. So we've approached this through basically 2 parts: creating an environment where we can capture the information, and this has been done thus far through a shared Google Sheet in which we capture information about the frameworks, the GEO principles, and the other principles that we're looking at, and then we create a mapping of the corresponding framework elements or principle elements to the GEO. In this case, we see an illustration of the GEO data management principles in the Google Sheet, and then a partial view of the mapping of some of those frameworks and principles that I discussed before. And then what I've also been working on is essentially some code in R that allows us to extract the information from that Google Sheet and provide a framework for being able to visualize and analyze and hopefully better communicate the connections between those the GEO principles and these other principles and frameworks. We have some early outcomes, including the ability to generate some more clearly formatted representations of the crosswalk that we see an example of here. Next slide, please. and a number of visualizations in which we can, in many respects, compare and contrast the coverage of principles as we map from the data management principles that are consistently in the left area of any of these network diagrams in the cyan colored boxes, and then the principle or data management framework that we're comparing to, typically in the right side in the more orange or red boxes. And this is just one pair of the data management frameworks that you can see the difference in coverage between the two and the gaps where we may want to be able to characterize more clearly where the data management principles in this case cover only a segment of the life cycle principles, or there's a potentially a very nice specific or broad coverage available. Next slide, please. This is a similar visualization for the FAIR and trust principles, in which we can see the difference in terms of, for example, we have at least a couple of the FAIR principles that do not, at this point, clearly correspond to geo data management principles, and vice versa. We have 3 geo data management principles that do not have a clear correlation with or connection with FAIR principles. And a similar sort of interpretation could be made in terms of a single data management principle from geo not having a corresponding trust principle for the trust principles. Next slide. But we can also do some comparisons between multiple principles. And this is just an illustration of the geo principles in the upper left quadrant of the circle, and the trust principles in the lower left, and then the FAIR principles essentially on the right half of the circle, providing a combined view of the mappings between, now in this case, the 3 sets of principles that we're working with. So next slide, please. Finally, as I said, this is really a work in progress, and we have lots of work to do. But one of the nice things and one of the benefits we have from setting up this linkage between the information and the ability to treat these mappings analytically is we can start to also be able to calculate metrics that relate to these ideas of specificity and coverage in terms of, do we have a single principle mapping to multiple corresponding principles or framework elements, or is there a closer one-to-one mapping in terms of specificity, or coverage in terms of, do we have any gaps in the mapping from one to another? We certainly need to work on completing our work with the current set of life cycles and principles, but also working with the community to identify others that we would benefit from engaging with in terms of performing a similar mapping. We have also been working on a draft working document to aid in communication for the crosswalk between these principles, and we're looking at being able to transition the insights from this type of analysis into that working document. Working with the broader community, we had a very productive discussion with the legal working group just in the last couple of weeks, but we certainly want to engage more broadly, as we have largely had a technical focus in looking at the data management principles in mapping to these other principles, but we really need to look at more broadly in terms of the legal and ethical issues. And this is where working with the data sharing principles, I think, is actually a very strong point for being able to work with our other geo groups, both within the data working group and beyond. And with that, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carl. Yes, we made it very interesting to see how all these principles are linked. Now, we were planning originally to have a small break. We are a little bit late, so we hope that you still keep us company continuously and learn about an evolution of open data and data, namely the open knowledge statement that Douglas Cripe will inform us about. Douglas, are you here? Yeah?
Yes, I think so.
Yes, you are here. We are in the same
All right, good.
cyberspace. Yes. So Douglas, he has been a long time expert at the Geo-Secretariat in Geneva. The floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much, Bente. So continuing in this flow of open data and management principles, Geo has been working on an open knowledge statement. And this originally came out of the concern for a results-oriented GEOS that our previous director, Gilberto Camara, had when he came to the Secretariat. He went back to a few documents that had been discussed at both plenary and the executive committee that focused on some aspects of how to make GEOS results-oriented, and by that we mean how do we direct GEOS to bring us to information that can be used for decision-making, evidence-based information. So that kicked off the idea of developing an open science statement, and an open science statement makes an appeal to making available all aspects of an application's development, from the methodologies that are being used to the data, of course, and then any algorithms and code and computing environment and so forth, all of that to be open so that it can be reproduced and replicated. The ITC in the Netherlands, as well as the Capacity Development Working Group, with inputs from the Data Working Group and the Geo-Secretariat, all developed a open science statement about a year ago. And then that was given out to the Geo community for feedback, notably through the program board. And a key message that we got back to was that this is good, but Geo is more than science. It is concerned with providing value along the entire information chain, from Earth observations to applications. So we've been working on revising the document to broaden it to an open knowledge statement. And in so doing, we're emphasizing that all of these components that we talk about, such as open science, open access, citizen and participatory science, open reproducible research, open software, open infrastructure, open hardware, open education, evaluation, and diversity of knowledge, all of these things have a role to play in the production of knowledge. And so this is a document that calls for all of this to be open and leading towards the production of evidence-based information for decision making. So this also falls into line with the Geo vision and mission, as well as the Canberra Declaration, to do just that, to provide evidence-based information. The program board that met back in June of this year endorsed the refocus on open knowledge and made some requests for a few items to be addressed, in particular the traditional knowledge in terms of indigenous communities, how they treat data, and also open infrastructure and open standards. So now the document has been presented to the executive committee yesterday, and they have given it the green light to go ahead to plenary. We're going to be talking about this document on Thursday on our session called Bridging the Digital Divide, where it will be brought to the Geo community, the Geo community for decision. And as such, anticipating that it will be approved, it will join the other principles that we have been discussing, the data sharing principles and data management principles, as guidance for development of activities of the work program and the Geo community in general. So there you have a quick tour of the open knowledge statement. Back to you, Bente.
Thank you for that update, Doug. Exciting times. If you have questions, Doug, you will have to leave us in not too long a time, right? So if you have
in about 10 minutes. So
right. So this is the time window for you to ask questions to Doug in the chat. But we move on, and we will learn more about the Geo Knowledge Hub. And Florian Franciskakis, also from the Geo Secretariat, will update us on the Geo Knowledge Hub. Florian, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Bente, and all the presenters so far. I think this is a great session with a great flow, so I'll try to work on this to present the Geo Knowledge Hub and how it fits in all of this puzzle and what we have discussed. Paula, next slide. So as Doug said before, now Geo is moving towards open knowledge, just not open data. And if we reflect on what it means for the Geo community, especially the Geo work program, we can ask ourselves a few questions. So how can we support the work program activities to reach end users, potential more end users, how to enhance the accessibility and reproducibility of the applications they produce, and also some key questions related to in situ data, for instance. So how to ensure the long-term archival and retrieval of these resources that are typically at the risk of being lost once the project ends. Next slide, Paula, please. So I will go into a live demo just after this slide, but just to give you a brief overview of what we do and how we share the knowledge in the Knowledge Hub. So basically, the idea is to group all the necessary resources to reuse an application inside what we call a knowledge package. So typically, a knowledge package would have input data, whether remote sensing, in situ, it would have the results, ready to run computing environments in the cloud, or instructions how to run it on your own computer, as well as publications and any other training materials such as videos, user guide, and anything that is relevant for end users to reuse this application and to make the best out of it. So Paula, just on the next slide. So yeah, no, that's all right. I will start sharing my screen and just give you a brief, quick tour about the Knowledge Hub and how it will look like. So if you, I will start sharing my screen. So I hope you can see my my internet window. If
yes,
that's okay, thanks. So the Knowledge Hub is a digital library for Earth observation application in which you can find the knowledge packages and navigate through all of these resources. So let's just go search for everything. So I'll just click on the search bar here, and it will display the work that is produced by some GeoWork program activities with which we have collaborated in developing the Knowledge Hub. And of course, in the future, there will be many more. So if we search for everything here, we have 71 results. And on the side here, we're able to filter by resource type, either publications, software, data sets, knowledge packages, video or audio resources, other, and presentations. So let me quickly start with by filtering the knowledge package to see what we have. And as you can see, we have knowledge packages on global wildfire dataset for fire analysis of fire regimes from the GWIS activity. We have one from GeoMountains on human population in the world's mountains. We have one from the Open Earth Alliance on the Open Data Cube Sandbox, one from the Brazil Data Cube, and so on. I'll just follow the same example as in my previous slides. So let's check one from GeoGlam about Send2Agri and an example of how to build a crop map for South Africa in Send2Agri. So here we see that it's a knowledge package. So let's just click on it. And what you would see is a record page about all the essential information that you need in order to understand what the solution does and how to reuse it. So first you have some basic information, then you have some elements about what this package contains, what is the advantages of using Send2Agree, about reproducibility and so on, and what you would need to use this solution. And one key element here is that below, if we scroll down, you have a section about elements of the knowledge package, in which you have all the elements that we showed before. So this is a video to display, to explain you the system. Then you have a software user manual. You have an online installation of Send2Agree in the European Space Agency Food Security Thematic Exploration Platform when it's ready to run. Also the same for Amazon Web Services, and the software and the data set, including in situ. So if I'll just go to one for the interest of time. So here you have, if you click in the page, you access the in situ data, its own record. So it has a DOI, which allows long-term retrieval. And here you have the different attributes of the shapefile, how it needs to be formatted in order to be used in Send2Agree. And here we have put in a zipped folder all the shapefile, and in order for users to just check. And it's available for download, of course. And here you have also the guidelines on how to collect new in situ data if you want to do this in your own area of interest. And as before here, you see that this resource is part of the following knowledge package. And if we click on it, we go back to the main knowledge package, which makes it very easy to access and to go back and to understand. And of course, we aim at having everything open for the community and for the outside world, and to be a place for the GeoWork program activities to share their work. So I'll just stop sharing now, Paula, and let you have go back to the slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Florian, for this quick introduction to the Geo Knowledge Hub. I did post a poll about the Knowledge Hub as well. So if you would indicate for us if you have heard about this, we will appreciate it. And you get to click on something new as well. Now, we are moving towards the implementation of the Geo principles inside or throughout the Geo work program. And Paula, you have been coordinating or done this survey, and we are about to hear the first initial results from the responses from on this survey. So the floor is yours. So Paula De Salvo has been with Geo for a very long time. She works in the Geo Secretariats as well. And she's behind the scenes here. Yeah, there you are, Paula. Paula, the floor is yours. We are excited to hear about the results.
Many thanks, Bente, and welcome everyone. It is my pleasure today to present to you the preliminary results of the GeoWork Program Activity Data Analysis Survey that has been launched at the end of September 2021 by the Data Working Group. The survey aims at having a complete overview of the entire data information flow for each GeoWork program activities. So the audience of this survey is the GeoWork program activities, as we mentioned a number of times, and the objective of the survey is to have this understanding of what are the key input data, whether in situ or satellite, and by key input data, we define them as the key ingredient for GeoWork program activities to perform their services as described in their their work program. We want to understand what are the key input data, what are the barriers for discovering, accessing those essential data sets. We want to understand how the output data and services produced by GeoWorld program activities are compliant with the data, with the geodata sharing and with the geodata management principles. And as well, we want to understand what is the relations of the output data and services produced by GeoWorld program activities with respect to the GEOS infrastructure, namely GEOS platform and the Geo Knowledgehub. The intent of this survey is to understand the gaps and to take the actions that could sustain GeoWorld program activities to progress and do better towards geodata sharing, data management principles, and as we just heard from Doug, towards the open knowledge. So first of all, we would like to thank all the GeoWorld program activities that in a short time have gone through a very exhaustive survey. It's a lengthy survey. And the results I'm going to present to you today are basically based on these 13 responses. We have, out of the 13 GeoWorld program activities, 4 initiative and 9 community activities. So we are aware it provides a partial perspective, and so these results will be updated as we do receive more completed survey. So I'll like to start looking closely at the various elements. So for what concern discoverability and accessibility of key input data, we count our results on a sample of 144 single data sources. And in this graphic, you can see that for what concern discoverability of satellite data that are essential for GeoWorld program activities to do their work, they are fairly well discoverable. And we can say the same for the accessibility. Satellite data are fairly well accessible. We have 56 satellite data sets mentioned, accessible on 62 as a total. The same, we cannot say the same for what concern in situ data and in situ derived data sets. The discoverability of in situ data, it's still at a good rate. We have 32 discoverable in situ data, key input data, out of 37. So we can say discoverability is at a good level. And accessibility for in situ and the in situ derived, the gray bars, we can see that it lowers quite substantially. So a first message is that the accessibility of key in situ data sets for GeoWorld program activities is not as good as the satellite. Following with the same key input data set, whether satellite, in situ, or in situ derived, we look at their relation with the GEOS platform. We have the satellite data. Out of 62, those satellite data, 45 were discoverable in the GEOS platform. To what concern accessibility, it lowers, and we have 37. But looking at in situ, again, we see very quickly that the discoverability of in situ data sets that are part of the key input data, it lowers drastically, and the accessibility requires a lot of attention, because we have one single data set outline as being accessible in the GEOS platform. Again, in these 13 GeoWorld program activities, I like to mention, to pause here a little bit, a while, because I'm personally aware that there are many other activities that have their in situ data discoverable and accessible in the platform. But for those 13 activities who responded, this requires definitely an attention and an action. Following, for what concern the barriers, this is a summary of some of the in situ data barriers by data categories that have been highlighted by the activities who responded. And what is interesting is that we have the categories of in situ data. For atmospheric observation, the main barriers are the fact that data is not available, the metadata is not available, it is not possible to access the data, and there is a restrictive license. For climatic data, we have barriers such as not possible to access the data and restrictive license. For environmental and climatic data, we have restrictive license and insufficient coverage. And for meteorological observation, we have insufficient coverage and quality not fit for purpose. We have here high resolution data, which is not in situ, but some activities are using high resolution data as instead of in situ when possible, extremely high, very high resolution data set. So the barriers are, it is not possible to access the data, as well as restrictive license. So we have in the survey a question, in what ways GEO should help to fill the in situ data gaps or remove the main barriers to efficient and effective use. What we can see is that the elements that have been chosen to for the majority as solution to support your program activities to close this gap is on communication activities, as well as setting standards and guidelines. Following, we have awareness raising, supporting projects, proposing infrastructure solution, as well as acting as a data custodian. I personally believe that out of this slide, there are a lot of interesting action that should follow to sustain your program activities in closing this gap. Let's look now at the output data. We do have interesting messages here. On the output data, and we know that your program activities, not many produce data, but they do produce data and services. So we have a sample of 39 total data sets. They are, let's say, fairly discoverable and fairly less than half, accessible as a web service. When we start to look at accessibility as directly downloadable, we see that the number really go down significantly. So many of the output data produced from your program activities in these 13 responders are not directly downloadable, and less than half are made available as open data. So, of course, the data sharing element here is one of the important element that needs to be advanced. And the same message can be derived from what concern discoverability and accessibility of output data in the GEOS platform, again, on the 13 responders that provided their output. So on the services, we have a similar situation. We have 43 services, well discoverable with 40 out of 43. And for what concern freely accessible, we see again that we have 7 services that are freely accessible out of 43. And the accessibility of these services via the GEOS platform, it's fairly high. So I like to move on the various other questions. The relations with the GEOS infrastructure. The 6 activities out of 13 responded that they would like to they would like to benefit from a community portal, which is a functionality provided by the GEOS platform. And 12 out of 13 responded that they are interested in contributing to the Geo Knowledgehub, as Florian briefly described to us before. So, of course, out of this information, it's evident that we need to take additional actions to contact and to serve better GeoWork program activities that are in need of these services. So we do have a section on the survey. We have a section all focused on data sharing and data management principles. So it is with pleasure that we've seen that, let's say, the majority of GeoWork program activities are somewhat familiar, and more than somewhat familiar and very familiar with GeoWork, with the data sharing and data management principles, and only 8% are not at all aware and familiar, I would say familiar, not aware, of the Geo principles. So the action indeed here could be derived is that we might need to go and do a bit of communication activities towards the not at all, and reach out to where there is a gap on familiarity with the principles. Then we have questions related: are the output data sets of GeoWork program activities aligned with the geodata sharing principles? And you would notice, as I did, that 59% responded yes, fully aligned, but the previous graphic did not say the same story. So, of course, this requires more attention, more in-depth analysis, and conversation and engagement with the GeoWork program activities. So, on the question, are you implementing the geodata management principles in your output data sets and services? Yes, fully or to a certain extent. We can see in the slide which are the principles that are mostly implemented: are discoverability, accessibility, and well-documented metadata, while the others fall into less being implemented. For interest of time, I'm going quicker here, and to end this initial analysis of the survey, we requested if the activity needs support in implementing or improve the adoption of the geodata sharing and geodata management principles. Half of them said yes. So again, actions derive here to meet the needs. And in the question related on the type of support required, the capacity building and financial support are being highlighted as the support required by GeoWork program activities. And finally, we do have 3 out of 13 that they do consider themselves as a success stories in implementing the geodata sharing and geodata management principle. This is exciting. We are very eager to go to meet them and discuss with them and learn how they've been adopting and implementing, and if they could be the good students and to the good models for other GeoWork program activities. We do have other questions related to the benefits, to the challenges, and to the time required to implement properly those principles, but in 10 minutes or more, I won't be able to cover this all. So one additional slide is that each of the GeoWork program activities has been telling us who are their targeted users. And this is extremely helpful because all of the data and services produced by GeoWork program activities need to be brought in the hands of the end user and breaking bottlenecks, existing bottlenecks. So very quickly, preliminary conclusion: we need to strengthen the relation between key input data and output data and services in the GEOS platform. We need to advocate to make output data and services as open data and implement better the data sharing. And there is a need of support in implementing the data sharing and data management principle through capacity building. And of course, my final message to all your program activities that are listening now, please do complete the survey. You will have time till the end of the year, but this is a very, very good occasion for all of us to progress together towards a better implementation of those principles that make GEO so unique. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you so much. There's a lot of work related to this kind of surveys, and we do encourage all of you to respond if you haven't already done so. So we are a little bit over the time. I see that there are some questions and some answers in the chat. Please go on and have a dialogue in the chat. But now I want you to prepare you for directing your attention now to away from the work program and more to one of the participating organizations and the Orgos Convention. And we will learn how they have used the GEO principles to advance public access to environmental information. And Marina Janusz, she is an environmental affairs officer at the Orgos Convention Secretariat, UNECE. So Marina Janusz, the floor is yours.
Good day, everyone, and thanks a lot, Bente, and also Jose Rubio for a nice introduction to my presentation, and also to Paola for underscoring main challenges in access to environmental information. I am pleased to join the event today and share with you thoughts on how GEO data sharing and data management principles can effectively advance public access to environmental information from the perspective of the Orgos Convention. On the next slide, I would like to provide you with some background information about the Orgos Convention. The convention is a legally binding multilateral environmental agreement for environmental democracy that guarantees public rights and imposes obligations on public authorities to access to environmental information, participate in decision making, and access to justice in environmental matters. Its ultimate objective is to safeguard a sound environment for human health and well-being, through transparent and participatory decision-making related to environmental matters. The convention has a legally binding protocol on pollutant release and transfer register that requires parties to establish a system of pollution inventories or registers about emissions to all environmental media and transfer of waste on a structured, computerized, and publicly accessible database that compiled through standardized reporting. And from the GEO perspective, it could be considered as in situ data. Finally, this year, the meeting of the parties to the Orgos Convention adopted a soft law, non-legally binding recommendations on the more effective use of electronic information tools. The document contains several references to the GEO principles for a reason I will provide later on. And the Secretariat to both instruments is provided by the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, or in short, UNECE. And interestingly, both the Orgos Convention and UNECE share the same membership as GEO, at least partially, and the Orgos Convention is also open for accession by any United Nations member state. For example, this year, the meeting of the parties to the convention welcomes the accession by Guinea-Bissau. GEO has always played a significant role in promoting access to Earth observation data and knowledge, and such synergy in the implementation of the Orgos Convention and the GEO principle is especially instrumental for promoting effective public access to environmental information, and we look forward to continuing our fruitful cooperation. On the next slide, I would like to underline the importance, one slide back, please, Paula. I would like to underline the importance of information and digitalization through the main provisions of the Orgos Convention related to the right to information, participation in decision-making, and access to justice. And in accordance with the Orgos Convention, the public authorities at all levels have an obligation to possess, update, and ensure effective public access to all relevant information online or upon request. Of course, nowadays, electronic information tools powered by modern digital technologies are indispensable to implement these obligations of the Convention. And there is a clear shift in proactive online access to information that can be more cost-effective for public authorities rather than provision of environmental information upon request, as the public demand for environmental information grows exponentially given the current interest in environmental protection and sustainable development. On the next slide, I would like to draw your attention that environmental information under the Convention has a broad scope and includes not only information on the state of the environment, but also information about factors, activities, and measures affecting or likely to affect the elements of the environment and the state of human health, safety, and habitat. And given this broad scope and difficulties in scoping environmental and other information, the interoperability between different information systems is crucially important. And open data remains basically an important common denominator to advance the effective implementation of the Convention. And we all know that public access to a particular data set held by public authorities can be driven by different legal and policy framework at the same time, varying from the freedom of information, freedom of environmental information, open data and open science, sustainable development goals, or sectoral legislation. These frameworks sometimes developed at different time by different actors with different perspective. And at the same time, given the numerous benefits or interests and risk assessment, it might be easier for public authorities to disclose data sets publicly rather than to keep their accessibility upon request or confidential, especially if there is a high demand for such data. And I guess that the GEO subgroup on law and policy might be well aware of these challenges, and we can follow up after the event how to join efforts to promote legal interoperability. From the Convention's perspective, easy and user-friendly public access to environmental information increase environmental awareness and action among the public and other stakeholders to address environmental issues at all levels, and also build trust between them and the government. Inform evidence-based decision-making and policy development, reduce administrative burden in processing requests for information, and also avoid duplication in the information collection. Improve management and the discoverability of data from different sources, and increase knowledge about the state of the environment with the support of open science, citizen science, and crowdsourcing initiatives, as well as ensure early notification measures to protect the natural habitats and also support a multi-hazard early warning system. And finally, improve measuring and reporting of progress towards the achievement of relevant internationally and nationally agreed goals and targets, including 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, Paris Agreement, European Green Deal, and others. On the next slide, and with these benefits in mind, let me provide a brief snapshot on the Eit recommendations I mentioned. The recommendations aim to assist parties and other interested states in supporting the implementation of the Convention through the use of electronic information tools by applying common approaches and standards. And the GEO principles provided an inspiration for this document, and I included as a reference text in addendum to the recommendation. And I do apologize for rushing through the document, despite that there are many ideas to unpack. The slide follows the structure of the recommendations, and in terms of general policy, the parties are encouraged to promote strategies related to e-government, open data, open science, and digital transformation with integrated environmental domain. Also, it's important to maintain digital environmental information system in accordance with the approach of open by design and by default, using the best available state-of-the-art digital technologies in the countries, being mindful about digital divide, and also, but at the same time, promote innovation in the environmental domain. The idea of the digital environmental information system supported by the GEO principle is at the heart of the recommendations. Such system should ensure public access to real-time and other dynamic and historical, up-to-date, accurate, and quality-controlled, comprehensive, standardized, and functional environmental information. This information should be made discoverable and accessible through the internet in machine-readable open forms and formats, meeting needs of different users. An important element of such system is a standardized metadata, so that the context of data and information collection and management are transparent and allow data discoverability and mining, machine-to-machine communication, use and reuse. And parties should ensure that databases, registries, lists, inventories, cadastres, and other resources containing environmental information are developed continuously maintained and converted where possible or upgraded in the digital form by default as integral parts of the national digital environmental information system. The recommendations are also promoting the adequate flow for business to government communication, integrating of big data, citizen science, and data from other complementary sources into a nationwide digital environmental information system. And also promote the use of citizen science crowdsourcing and local and digital knowledge through electronic information tools. Important part of the recommendations is mobilization of resources and international cooperation. The recommendations identify 18 types of environmental information to be proactively disclosed in machine-readable, user-friendly, and open formats, which is very wide. It's from environmental monitoring data, data on releases and transfer of pollutants, it's big data or space-based data, data from electronic databases, registers, cadastres, and inventories, decision-making data. And also use of national environmental indicators or the relevant indicators agreed within the process of sustainable development goals, or environmental indicators agreed at ECE or other international processes related to the state of the environment should be made publicly accessible. And the recommendations also encourage the use of open licenses to promote use and reuse of environmental information. And in this context, open licenses means standardized public licenses available online that allow data and other content to be freely accessed, used, modified, and shared by anyone for any purpose, and that rely on open data formats. For example, custom-made licenses, Creative Commons licenses, open government licenses for public sector information. It might be that from practice we see that actually the best intention of the public authorities is to provide environmental data and information for use and reuse, but because they use a standard approach to or standard licenses on their website that basically leave the users in unclear situation that whether this could be whether the data could be used and reused effectively. The idea is that to maintain, the idea is that the front end for the nationwide digital environmental information system will be National Environmental Portal as a single one-stop web access point. And such portals, as well as other tools, should contain progressively an open application programming interface to provide data and metadata as appropriate, and supported by clear technical documentation that is complete and available online. And the idea, of course, that the data would be integrated with a notification and tools for multi-hazard early warning system, and also participatory mapping, crowdsourcing, citizen science could be used as a tools to promote public participation in environmental decision making. Use new and emerging technologies. Digital technologies can be used on a pilot and lab-based projects, basically to see what is working in further modernization of digital environmental information system. And of course, it would be important to have open source user feedback mechanism and have awareness raising events and organize hackathons, datathons, promotion campaigns for the use and reuse of environmental data, and of course promote the accessibility, reuse, and interoperability of research data, that it brings all information in a coherent ecosystem. And in conclusion, I would like to outline just further steps for the work in this area. And the Orgos Convention Task Force on Access to Information will further monitor the implementation of the recommendations by the parties and other interested states, and the partner organizations like GEO, UNDP, OECE, and other international organizations are encouraged to support the implementations by the parties. The Orgos Clearinghouse and the collection of the case studies on electronic information tools can provide information support and sharing good practices in this area. And the parties to the Orgos Convention are expected to further report on the progress in this area in the next 2025 reporting cycle. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Marina. And here you see some, the final slide there, you see some links, and you will get the slides so you can follow up later. We are running indeed a little bit late, so we are rushing so that hoping that we will keep your attention as we are concluding with a look more to the future and how the data sharing and data management principles can make both data and services more interoperable. And to speak to that, we have Ana Ponta from Demos Engenharia in Portugal, and she's also a co-chair of the Next EOS community activity. And Ana, let us hear how future interoperability can come about across the GEO communities using the GEO principles as a guide. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Bente. Okay, thank you very much. Next slide, please. Okay, so let me start by addressing the current Earth observation status globally. As we have seen in this session, it's a good example that we are focused very much on data availability, and actually Earth observation systems have been focusing very much on data availability. This is a field that has been very institutional and very oriented to supplying institutional agencies and a number of sectors with specific data, and it has been also very research oriented. At the same time, there's a goal to support decision making based on Earth observations, and also increasingly to support or to address market needs and increase the commercial value of Earth observations. So, but both decision making people and also market, they have specific needs because, for instance, decision makers, they are non-technicians, non-academics, and people who need graphical and easy to access interfaces, and they need to have a clear view on the Earth observation added value. And markets are made not only by academia and companies and institutions, but also users at large. And we have topics like climate change that are very easy to understand. How the increasing request for Earth observation informations, easy to access, that public at large has. So the Earth observation systems have been generating societal, environmental, and commercial value, but there's a lot of potential in all three aspects to be explored. Next slide, please. So the gaps here are on applications, tools, and services. Not only the data in general, but specifically applications, tools, and services. This requires integration, interoperability, standardization, technology transfer, and a kind of democratization of Earth observation applications. So the idea, the need is to go from institutional R&D to innovation, so coming to the market. And this is because the uptake by users and the market and decision makers is significantly enabled by these end-of-chain products. So we are going towards applications as a service more than data as a service. So I've had a few notes there regarding the initiatives that we have been listening to today in this session. These initiatives go in this direction. All of them go in this direction, but they are not yet covering all these gaps. So, for instance, the Geo Knowledge Hub is more about open science and still a bit research oriented, with research oriented goals. The Orgos Convention has converging principles, but it is not yet across all the geo regions. The Inspire Directive is a good example of interoperability across borders, but not an example of uptake by the users and people at large. So next slide, please. So the GEOS is within this scope, and it has focused very much on Earth observation data availability. Regional catalogs have been developed, focused also on data availability, and the geodata sharing and data management principles apply to data and information. So it leaves a bit behind, or it leaves a bit out the applications and services. They are not fully covered. And we can see that the current definition of Earth observations that GEO has in its website is focused on data specifically. Next slide, please. So within GEO, the next HEOS is a community activity with the aim to create an interface between GEO communities across different sectors, across different thematic areas, to identify gaps and transversal bottlenecks to the uptake of Earth observation data across a number of areas. So we have 80 members, and we are organized across along 6 working groups. Next slide, please. Yeah, and we have been discussing these gaps and creating this new vision of what could be the Earth observations fields and systems in the future to increase the uptake of Earth observations by users. So the new vision is about going from data hubs to digital ecosystems of Earth observation tools and services that are accessible and interoperable. So it is a vision. It is a user-driven vision. Namely, the idea is to promote the co-design of Earth observation tools with the users to increase the user experience with Earth observations, and the trust and increase the trust of potential end users in these tools. It is about orchestrating available resources into integrated distributed services and leveraging on the rationalization of existing platforms. It should be sustainable based on the diverse funding sources, including the exploitation of new markets, so as to increase the commercial value of Earth observation and to introduce Earth observation into traditional markets. Regarding geos, this also calls for a federation of regional ecosystems. Next slide, please. And about the future interoperability that is at stake in this perspective, it should be a purposeful interoperability, so user-driven, where services are customized based on easy access, standardization, and integration. And this interoperability should cover three levels. Data, in terms of the hubs that are already existing, the applications and services in this idea of creating ecosystems, and across regions, the idea of having a federation of ecosystems. The future interoperability should be about implementing geo principles in all these levels, all these three levels. These services should be scalable based on co-design with users, and we have to address adequate collaboration approaches and joint governance between technology providers. An example are the service level agreements that will be needed in all this landscape of an ecosystem. Next slide, please. So, at Next Use, we are discussing this new vision, and we are coming up with a green paper. We had 10 minutes so far. As I said, we have now 80 members, but we are increasing the community based on voluntary interests. We have 18 editors directly involved in this green paper, and the view is that this will contribute to the call for inputs from the geo community in the spring next year to inform on the process for revisiting the concept of geos. So we intend to have a detailed analysis on current gaps and to come up with concrete recommendations on the future of geos development based on this new vision that I just presented. And we are all open to contributions, so not only open to welcome you at the Next Use community activity, but also to contribute. If you want to contribute to this green paper and to discuss these ideas with us, feel free to contact me or Bente, and we can integrate you in this discussion. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna, and thank you so much to the audience who is still with us. We are running a little bit over time, but I think with that note, I think we definitely deserve to hear a summary of what we've heard today, the story we have heard today. Before I give you the floor, Anastasia, I just wanted to offer the audience here a possibility to indicate whether or not they are interested in one or more of the invitations you received during this session. Anastasia, I simply give the floor to you. You are Anastasia Vahume. You are representing AfriGeo here. The RCMRD are hosting the secretariat. You are a surveyor, Eastern and Southern Africa data and technology lead. The floor is yours, Anastasia.
Thank you very much, Bente, and thank you everyone for listening. I'll basically just give a summary of what we've been through and try to give a conclusion of where we will be headed as the data working group. I think it's we've had very interesting conversations, very interesting presentations, starting all the way from where the geo data sharing and data management principles came from. That was our first presentation, starting in 2005, when the issue of the open exchange of data was discussed and some products shared with the geos. Going to 2014, where the data management principles were adopted at the Geo Plenary 11th in Gabon, and going on to 2015, where the new data sharing principles were adopted in Mexico City. And all the while, there has been an emphasis on openness, mainly looking at the restrictions on usage of data, costs, emphasizing that it should just be marginal cost of production, and also timeliness. And this has culminated in the GeoPortal, currently with 150 plus catalogs. And I think these are quite a journey that the Geo has taken. And over the session, we've had great testimonies. So in the next slide, the crosswalk of geo data sharing and data management principles. We do recognize that there have been more recent principles and data life cycles, such as the fair, care, and trust. And we've had how an analysis is being done in terms of looking at areas of overlap and also trying to identify opportunities for more effective communication and implementation of the geo data sharing and data management principles, and also taking into consideration that the fair, care, trust, and other data life cycles are equally important. This has been a consultative process where vetting and contribution by broader community is done, and also seeking to expand the perspective beyond the current technical focus. Next slide, please. Now, we also looked at the implementation of the geo data sharing and data management principles, an example of the European perspective with focus on in situ data. I think it's good to realize that many times we talk about satellite data, but do not look at the in situ data, many times used for validation of the satellite and the satellite data and the challenges that many people, many users are facing in terms of accessibility of in situ data. Several examples were shared on how this is being handled, and I think I'll just highlight the Copernicus GMS data policy that's actually looking at the in situ data in terms of the landscape of availability, the gaps, and the bottlenecks, as well as trying to create partnerships with providers. And I think it's also good to take note of the Open Data and Public Sector Information Directive. I think the examples given from the European perspective have all identified the issue of coming up with policies and directives. And I believe that this, in a way, kind of pushes institutions or organizations to share data and to adhere to certain principles that are set. Next slide, please. And on the previous one, we've had the European perspective, but I think it's good to note that other regions may be experiencing similar issues. They're also trying to conform to these principles, and in future would also like to hear more from them. We've also heard about the Open Knowledge Statement, which is seeking to align with the GEO vision and the mission, and also the Canberra Declaration, in order to provide evidence-based information for decision making. And we do note that these are statements that is yet to be approved, and we are hoping that it's going to give to be a good guideline on how to deal with open data. And we've also looked at the Geo Knowledgehub that is now accessible, and the link is provided there. And the Geo Work Program activities have indicated their readiness to share their knowledge in the hub. They're also invited to get in touch with the Geo Secretariat to be able to be guided on how to share, and it will be a very good resource for everyone. Now, on the analysis, the data analysis and survey initial results provided by Paola, I think she already highlighted the three key outcomes: the need to strengthen the relationship between the input and output data services and the GEOS platform, the need to support implementation of the data sharing and data management principles through capacity building, and also that not many of the GEO Work Program activities responded. So those who haven't, kindly please respond. We're already seeing good results that will help improve the GEO the management principles, and also it's a very collaborative effort. So the more feedback that we get, the better. Next slide, please. Now, on the implementation of the GEO principles, the perspective of the Orgos Convention, we've also seen the promotion of public access to information, mainly the environmental information, with emphasis on interoperability. And one of the key things that I noticed is the highlights on the priority types of information, the emphasis on the tools and infrastructure that are used to share data openly, and also engagement with public and other stakeholders. And this ensures a lot of feedback and the importance of collaboration and partnerships. Next slide, please. And on the future interoperability, we've also looked at the current Earth observation status and the gaps, and the good efforts by the next EOS towards accessible and interoperable tools and services, including actually emphasizing on the user-driven approach, the co-design, co-development, and collaborations, leveraging on existing systems and platforms, as well as sustainability. I think many times projects fund activities, data is collected, applications and products are developed, but when the project ends, what happens to that? I think the issue of sustainability is really something that needs to be looked at, and it's good that it's been highlighted as a future effort. Next slide, please. Okay, so to end this session, I really feel that we need to call upon more members. The data working group has been in operation for less than 2 years. And one of the things that we've noticed is that the membership is not really what we would have expected. We do need more members. If you're interested, and we really encourage people to get interested and join, contact the GEO Secretariat and how to join. And there's also a big challenge in regional representation. I think you've noticed that the examples we got, most of them are from Europe. We also have good membership from the United States. But we are lacking a lot of representation from other regions, especially Africa. So please join us, and also be ready to share what's happening, because we want this to be a global effort towards open data sharing, and we want to help each other. And with that, I turn it back to Bente. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anastasia. and you are in fact also one of the co-leads, the co-chairs of the data working group. And so join Anastasia and the rest of us who also are members of the data working group here today. We did notice, by the way, in the interest of time, I know you need a break now. Just contact the Geosecretariat, contact the names, the emails that you saw here on the presentations that will be made available to everybody. And also a recording of this event will also be made available. We welcome any support that you have. I noticed in the polls that there are in fact some of you who are probably new to this community, and we can only say welcome, welcome. We need all the resources and the people that we can get. So with that, thank you, a big thank you to all the speakers. Extremely interesting and well formulated presentations in my view. This is something that we will definitely use in our continued work in the data working group for sure, across all the 4 subgroups that I showed you initially. And with that, I wish you a lovely evening and hope to see you around during the rest of the Geo Week that will happen this week. Thank you so much, everybody.